We'll call to order the Tuesday, February 28th Gardner Planning Commission. If everybody please rise and join Commissioner Roberts in the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
We'll now have our roll call started by Commissioner Copeland.
Copeland here.
Godwin here.
Burnett here.
Pop here.
Roberts here.
There is a quorum present. We have 4 items on our consent agenda. Would any of the commissioners like to pull any of those items off of the consent agenda?
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to pull item number 2.
And I'd like to pull item number 1.
Anybody like to pull 3 or 4 off? Not, we'll pull items 1 and 2 off.
I'm sorry, not number 1. Number 2, just like you asked.
Okay, so far we have number 2 pulled from the consent agenda.
No number 1.
No, number 1.
Sorry.
No, you're right.
I couldn't find my meeting minutes. I thought it was the same thing.
So without any further discussion, items 1, which is the minutes, items 3, which is the preliminary plat for Quick Trip, and item 4, which is the site plan for Quick Trip, are all approved at this time. Do we have a staff presentation for item number 2, which is SP 12-01, Sing Auto Services Bay Edition. Consider a site plan for Sing Auto Service Bay Edition located at 18865 East Gardner Road. The application is filed by, excuse me if I'm saying this wrong, Walt Singh with Sing Food and Gas Services with engineering services provided by Tappan Am Associates Incorporated.
And since this item was on consent, staff did not prepare a presentation. Let me see if I can get a site plan pulled up.
Are there any specific questions from the commissioners on this?
Well, my personal question is, with the new addition, it looks like we're going to a near 0 setback on the property line. I didn't see anything really in the report about that specifically. It looked like there was some BZA activity that may come up, but
That's related to the parking setback. The building setback is very close to 0, but there is no side setback for buildings in the commercial, the general commercial district, general business district, excuse me.
we have 0 setback?
C2, there's no side setback except when adjacent to residential.
Okay.
Are there any questions for the applicant, or would the applicant like to come speak on behalf of this application? Is the applicant present? Mr. Pop, did you have a question?
I mean, he had the same question I had about the setbacks, and now that she mentioned it, it's between the 2 properties, so and they're both C2, so it makes sense now.
Okay. Any discussion on this item or any concerns?
Mr. Chairman, I would move that we approve the site plan for Sing Auto Service Bay Edition SP 1201, subject to the recommendations and stipulations A through E presented by staff.
I'll second.
It's been moved by Commissioner Godwin and seconded by Commissioner Pop to approve the site plan SP-12-01 with stipulations A through E. Is there any discussion? If not, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, same sign. Motion carried. Our next item this evening is the CUP 12-01 Russell Oil and Gas Lease. It's conduct a public hearing to consider a conditional use permit for oil and gas production located at the northeast corner of Four Corners Road and 159th Street, north side of the intersection of 159th Street and Kill Creek Road. The application is filed by D&Z Exploration Incorporated with engineering services provided by Allen Drayan, Drews and Associates Incorporated. The process for our public hearings is the staff will give a presentation, and then the applicant will give a presentation, and then we will open it up to public comments after those two presentations. So at this time, staff presentation.
The conditional use permit request is for 10 oil wells with 1 tank batteries. This is listed as conditional use for the agricultural zone district. And looking at your screen, there's actually 2 different outlines there for you to look at. The yellow outline is the current request. The original application was actually for a larger area, which is the area outlined with the blue outline. And there you can see a red outline and the blue outline on the development plan map, showing that the property is planned for low-density residential uses. And this is the 2010 aerial view of the site. See it's existing farm, agricultural land uses. To give you a little background on this property, it was annexed in 2004 in accordance with an existing agreement between the city and the Russell family for the purchase of the Kill Creek wastewater plant site. At that time, and still today, it's into single-family residential uses. The Russell family petitioned for the city created a sanitary sewer benefit district for that agreement. That project was completed in 2008. Following litigation that concluded last year, the assessments will begin with the payments being due in November 2012. CUP applications require a site plan. The applicant, when this was first submitted, wasn't sure what to show on the site plan since the number and locations of oil wells is variable due to how the first oil was produced. So staff suggested originally showing a worst-case scenario to show what might be possible on the property. The applicant then responded with a site plan that included 190 oil wells, 151 injection wells, 4 injection sheds, and 2 tank batteries, although he stated that he never anticipated actually developing it to that extent. Due to the magnitude of that plan and the initial reactions from staff upon viewing that plan, the applicant agreed to amend the application and submit for just the first phase at this time. So that was the amended application, which is 10 wells on the southeastern 160 acres. Did want to make a correction. This was confusion on my part. I've been getting a crash course in oil wells since this is not something I've had experience with before. I was mixed up between the term hydraulic fracturing and water flooding. Staff report said no hydraulic fracturing, but there is actually hydraulic fracturing with this first phase. It's the water flooding that would occur with later phases. Later phases would then require additional conditional use permits. So just to show you sort of the initial application versus the amended application, you can see on the initial one, that the entire site would have been developed with the oil wells, which again they did not expect to do, but that is the extent to which the state regulations would allow them to develop it in lieu of city regulations. And then the amended application on the right shows you that southeastern part, the 10 wells that are proposed. And zooming into that a little closer. While the application has been reduced to the first phase, the applicant does request some assurances that they would be able to continue drilling. However, additional conditional use permits would require the same process, public hearings, recommendation by the Planning Commission, and City Council approval. So it's not really possible to give those kinds of assurances over time. Attorney Hubbard had helped us review this application and recommended a stipulation requiring the lease to state the royalties to go with the ownership of the land, to clarify that, not just the ownership, but actually that if in the event of a default, the royalties would go to the city, even though the city would not get possession of the land for however long it takes to go through that process. If the landowner does default and the city acquires the land, that would ensure that we would get those royalties to help pay off those assessments. He also suggested that the city reserve the right to terminate the conditional use permit in the event of a default. The applicant is not in favor of that because they need assurance of the right to use the property. If the landowner doesn't pay, that's something that they have no control over. They did not want to be kicked off the property due to those circumstances beyond their control. Our attorney said that a compromise might be to not stipulate that right now, but reconsider in the future if it was warranted due to the number, location, or density of wells. According to HUD, operating an abandoned oil and gas wells can pose potential hazards to housing, including potential fire, explosion, spray, or other pollution. That was one of our concerns upon initially reviewing the application. Since this area is planned for low-density residential, we've included a stipulation to require as-built plans to help keep track of exact well locations. That way we can ensure that as residential development occurs in and around this property, that we can make sure that homes are not built directly over abandoned wells and that they have sufficient setbacks to operate wells. Fire hydrant is required per the fire code. Propane gas is typically used with this type of operation. However, it's not allowed within the city limits, so they do have other options there. Wells and structures must be located outside of easements with floodplain, and erosion control must be established where adjacent to streams or ponds. Well drilling water pits must be fenced until the surface has been restored. The parcel is currently used for livestock, so there is an existing fence with lock gates that does enclose the site. We do also have a chapter in our city code relating to gas and oil permits. So in addition to the conditional use permit, they'll need to come back and apply for the gas and oil permit. The permits are issued by the city council. There's a $150 application fee, the annual $35 fee, probably was sort of expensive some of these. Drilling must be on agricultural land. It's reviewed by the public works director, city departments, and the governing body. Governing body considers approval and issues the permit. Includes requirements for inspection, drilling, operations, abandonment. City staff will probably retain a consultant to assist with those inspections. Drilling is prohibited between 9 p.m. and 6 a.m. Must have electric pumps and be surrounded by locked fences at least 6 feet in height. Tank batteries must be at least 200 feet from existing structures protected by dikes. Oil field operator insured and bonded. Abandonment procedures, and the applicant has actually requested a waiver for the requirement of blow-off protectors in this chapter because it's actually not needed for this type of formation. So that decision would be made by City Council at the time the permits are issued. The tank battery is proposed to be set back approximately 200 feet from the center line of 159th Street. There would be no open storage of equipment other than the tank battery itself. The applicant would agree to retain existing trees where possible. We do have some aesthetic concerns for the battery being located directly across from Celebration Park. So the applicant has agreed to install evergreen trees to screen it. However, it's not shown on the plan, so that would be approved administratively by staff for the stipulation. And then just sort of some guidelines for what we'd be looking for as far as screening. It'll depend on the species chosen, but it should be probably 5 to 10 feet apart spacing, on the southwest and east side with a minimum height of 15 feet at maturity. Park System Master Plan includes Greenway Trail development along Kill Creek with future neighborhood parks to be located around 151st Street adjacent to future trails. Additionally, bicycle and pedestrian pathways are planned along 151st Street, Four Corners Road, and 159th Street. Access would be made from the existing access points on the property. A new electric distribution line could be located underground. Again, excuse me, the framing. If a water flood is proposed with future conditional use permit application, then that's when the additional stipulations relating to water and environment might be necessary. Staff does recommend a time limit of 10 years with the option to renew. The applicant comes in for future conditional use for future wells prior to the expiration, we would abandon this permit and start a new one with a new time limit. So they come in 2 years, we could look at either an 8-year permit or we could look at a 10-year permit starting from that point. So there's different options there. Stipulation that was suggested by staff specifies the earlier of either 10 years, a new conditional use permit, or the date when oil and gas extraction ceases and the property is restored. So the staff recommendation was for approval, subject to stipulations requiring it to remain zoned for agricultural uses, the stipulation relating to the oil royalties and the lease, as-built site plan to be provided, screening of the tank batteries, wells and structures being located outside of easements of floodplain, the water pits being fenced at all times, and the expiration date. We do have our attorney, Jim Hubbard, on hand to help answer questions related to the benefit district. We have Jeffrey Binder, who is an associate geologist with Burns & McDonnell, who is also here on behalf of the city to help answer questions about oil wells, as well as Jerry Williams, who is an attorney who specializes in oil and gas type things. And then Dave Green has also been working extensively on this with us. So if you have any questions for us, we can answer those at this time, or we can go ahead and turn it over to the applicant.
Are there questions for staff at this time? One question I have for the Parks Division. You guys have reviewed that, and do you have any concerns with the quality of the park or anything with that just north?
Yes, I think initially our concerns, first of all, were with it being adjacent to Celebration Park and in the school and the activities that take place. Understand some screening efforts would be made to help with some of that. Additional concerns were with some of the park plans that are for that area in the future, future development plans along the Kill Creek, the trail system itself, and then potentially a neighborhood park closer to 151st Street. The park master plan was updated and developed with the idea that this particular property would be residential in the future, and with the proposed plan looking more long-term for this, that would certainly go against those plans. So there are some concerns with that as well, especially with some of the investments that have been made in that area. So I think that covers, for the most part, some of the things that we noted.
I have a question, but I'm not sure who to ask it for. So this was part of the sanitary sewer benefit district. What, if any, problems will this drilling cause to the improvements we've already made to the land? Is that going to cause anything, or?
It won't impact the sanitary sewer.
Okay.
I think it was-
I didn't know if there was piping or what had been in that 3 million, whatever it was. Almost 4
There's
million.
gravity lines, there's force mains, so there's pipe in the ground at locations that could be spotted based on the manholes.
But the drilling won't hurt what
But they'll be able to
improvements have already made.
they'll be able to spot
Okay,
or have located prior to drilling the underground facilities and avoid them.
okay.
Other questions for staff at this time? Thank you, Amy. At this time, would the applicant please, or do you have a presentation?
I don't have a presentation, but I'll answer any questions that anyone may have, or
If you could step up to the microphone and for the record, state your name and business or address.
Zane Belton with D&Z Exploration.
Okay, thank you. We may have some questions later. Does anybody have any questions right now for the applicant?
Our
Thank you
physical,
for your company address.
900 North Elm Street, St. Elmo, Illinois, 62458.
We may have questions later, and that would give us an opportunity to call on you.
Okay.
Since this is a public hearing, we are opening this up to the public at this time. If anybody would like to speak about this application, if you could step up to the microphone. And really, if you had anything else, or if you want to just have a seat and we'll invite people up.
Okay.
Does not look like we will have any public comments this evening. So is there a motion to close the public hearing?
Mr. Chair, I move we go ahead and close the public hearing.
Second. It's been moved by Commissioner Pop and seconded by Commissioner Copeland to close the public hearing. Is there any discussion? If not, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, same sign. We'll now close the public hearing. Comments, questions for staff? When I initially saw this, saw the 190 oil wells, I went and drove around that area and looked at some of the other exploration that was done in that area. When this was amended to have the lower number that we have now, which is 10, with understanding that there may be future brought before us, I was able to kind of look out there and see what was going on in that neighborhood. I also drove around the park and the schools and saw that area. So I did have a lot of questions. I think a lot of those were just answered by the staff presentation. And I do have concerns about long-term about Celebration Park. I can say that our family uses it quite a bit out there almost all during the spring and summer. So understand that I don't think we want to hurt that facility, but we also want to look at, see what's going on in that neighborhood and match stuff with that. So those are kind of my comments when I first saw this and was made aware of it. Other questions or comments or?
My biggest question is, I noticed on one of the staff's slides that they have to have as-built of where all these wells and everything is going to be dug, so we don't put a house on top of one of them. And then there's the possibility of them coming back and putting more, drilling more in this particular piece of property. Then, if you poke this thing full of holes, how in the world are we planning on putting any houses in there in the future?
Well, naturally, it would be a little bit more difficult to plan the neighborhood around that, depending on the density of those. But with the spacing at, I think it's 330 feet, even on the plan that included as many as would be allowed, I think there's a way to do it, but it would take a little more creativity than usual.
So, is there something that we have to put up around each one of those abandoned holes? Or is it just we cover it over and just say you can't build here? I mean, I'm not sure exactly how that all works.
I think they have to be, basically our regulations, which would mirror, I think, the primary regulation, I'll look to Mr. Bender or Mr. Williams to back me up on this. Basically, you have to plug the hole following regulations. You have to, so I'm thumbing through the regs here. Bear with me. It has to, within a certain period of stopping production, basically you have to remove the equipment, plugging. It has to be plugged by submitting the well from the bottom to a depth of 6 feet below grade. KCC probably has more stringent regulations. And then basically cut off all casing 6 feet below grade. So that would be the initial what we would require. And then I'd probably look to you guys on any other KCC regs.
If you could-
Jerry Williams, consultant hired by the city. The regs for the KCC are very similar. They want the well totally plugged top to bottom with concrete and then cut off. It'll be cut off 6 to 8 feet below surface, but you gotta mark that well some way because you shouldn't be building a house over that exact location. I think that would be a material fact that would have to be disclosed to the landowner. That many houses are built close to wells, but I don't know of anyone built on top of an old well.
How close can you build a house to it? I mean, if you can't build on top of it, then how far from it would be safe?
On the surface, there's no impact beyond 3 feet. It's a column of concrete and steel that has no pressure on it, so it's not going to break out. It's just a matter of how you're going to dig a foundation. I would say get 20 feet away from it so you can dig the foundation and backfill it, and then you'll be fine.
So you can put a road, or, we can put roads and sidewalks over the top of them, is that correct?
Can't ask that. I've never known of a paved road over an oil field. Lots of rock roads, but
One of the reasons why I'm asking this question is because after this thing is done, what do we get to do with this piece of property? What does the owner get to do with this piece of property once it's been exhausted of its oil and natural gas supply? Does it just sit as an open piece of property? I'm not sure Parks and Rec wants to put a park on it. It's possible, but that's an awfully large park. But I would think that if you go and you poke all these holes in the ground to get the gas, natural gas and oil out of it, that depending on your density, you kind of render it useless for any sort of development.
Dan, the spacing in this area between wells is about 380 to 400 feet apart.
Mm-hmm.
So if you have a producer, so you're 400 feet apart, you'd have to do your plat for your running roads and your lines and stuff. Now, if they come in with water flooding in the future,
Mm-hmm.
in between these wells goes a water input well.
Okay.
So now we're down to 200 feet of clearance.
Okay.
And to make this successful, they think they will have to water flood it.
Okay, so
So it'll take some engineering to make it work.
okay. I guess just what my initial thought was in all of this is that we approve this or whatever, but then 10 years down the road, or 15 years, or 20 years down the road, when it's done, what is going to be the use of this property? Because right now we've got it zoned. Is there anything? Well, comprehensive land use, or the low density residential. So I'm going to tell you right now, I'm not going to want to put my house anywhere near those things. And they may be perfectly safe. I'm not saying that they're not. But, I know they're inert and they're just big concrete columns that are going to be in the ground. But when you start having, I know there's 880 feet between these, but if you start putting, like you said, the water infiltration, there's another piece that you can't build on after that's done. So here we've got all of these Swiss cheese places on a piece of property that you can't build anything on. And so what does that do to that piece of property when at some point the economy will come back, I pray, that everything else happens around it? Or if they decide to expand onto these other sections, so now we've got, I don't know, quite a bit of, almost a square mile of unusable land. right in the middle of the city. I mean, that's just my biggest concern. I'm not worried about the gas wells now, I'm worried about what's gonna happen in the future. Piece of property.
Is that a concern for the landowner, though?
Well,
I mean, if they have a piece of land that they can't do anything with because they've done that to it, then that's what they get. They get a vacant piece of land when they're done. I mean, I'm not concerned necessarily about, you know, what the landowner gets to do with it if they choose to do this with it. I mean, if this is within their right to do, then it's certainly within their right to do. And that's one use of their land, and it may make things more difficult for them for any other use down the road,
I will throw
depending on
out,
the density.
just to the west of where we already have the development, on Kill Creek Road there at Symphony Farms, just to the west, that piece of property, has a lot of oil wells on it. You go up 4 corners to the corner, and there's oil wells to your west, and you go down 159th Street, all the way back into the golf course, there's oil wells all the way back in to the golf course.
and I'm not saying that this is not what we should say no to the project or anything. I just want to find out what are our options in the future as a planning commission, not necessarily the property owner. I agree with you in the fact that it's the property owner's deal, he can do whatever he wants with, but when it comes back to us for development and stuff like that, and somebody wants to put, you know, I don't know, commercial district or something in there, and what is it going to look like? What recourse do we have to help restore that to some semblance of a piece of property that will fit within the confines of Gardner? I mean, I know there's a bunch, I've been out there many, many times, I've seen all the oil wells, I did drive out there and look at all the oil wells and the tanks and everything, and that was one of my biggest concerns is when this runs out, at some point it will, where it gets too costly to actually extract the oil from underneath there. What happens to the piece of property and what is it going to look like within the city of Gardner?
I think it's a very valid question. I don't know that we can answer it, not knowing what the density will be.
Well,
And we know that you can't build on top of it. That's the regulation. You cannot build on top of an abandoned well.
I personally don't know of a regulation where you can't. I don't think you should. I just said it should be a material disclosure you make, and nobody lends you any money to do that.
So it's-
well, and we're asking for them to document all of them anyway,
Right.
and so it's going to be an as-built on them anyway, no matter.
Clearly, it's not advisable. And you're PE?
I'm an attorney.
You're an attorney. Okay. You're a PE. Would it be inadvisable to build on top of an abandoned well?
Yes?
Then I think it would be easy for a future planning commission, because it won't be us. I think it'd be easy for a future planning commission to make the decision that they have to build around them. And if that means they can't build to the density that they would like, or in a configuration that they'd like, then it has to be much less dense. And something would have to work if they're going to do it at all, or it remains a vacant piece of land.
We also need to keep in mind that this may be the first of several conditional use permits, or this may be the only one that we look at.
Right, and we don't know.
We don't know at this point, but they want to keep that option open.
I'm not trying to minimize what you're saying.
No.
And I agree
not-
with you too, Dan.
I'm just worried about, we built a school, we built an awesome park out there, and now it's going to be a series of oil wells
Yeah.
next to it.
I have a challenge
Screening
with that
is,
too.
they're going to plant trees around it, I assume, the evergreen trees, that's what we're requiring.
Around the tank battery, yes.
No.
What about the wells themselves?
No, there's currently no landscaping proposed around the wells.
I mean, I'd really like not to see them.
Excuse me. We have asked that they fence around their wells for safety purposes, and fence around their drill pits, and I think that's a fair stipulation.
There's that
But is that
stipulation.
the little thing that goes up and down and pumps the oil out?
The pump jack.
Okay, the pump jack, okay.
And we'd have a hog-type fence suggested around each well afterwards.
Great for security, but still doesn't do much for visibility.
No.
mean, pardon me for being a stickler on this, but I love that area for that very reason of the park and school. And I know we've got those things out there now, but I personally don't want to see them. If it's going to be in there, they have the right to put them out there, but for the park and the school and everything else, and to protect other people's property values per se, I would like these things to be as obscure as possible, not visible from the street and from I mean, I'm not saying 360-degree screening, but
What is the view shed from around the location? I'm interested to see what do we have any photos of the property from Celebration Park or from 159th Street or any of the surrounding properties could view it?
it looks like most of it's on the hill. I mean, there's one that's at 1010, which is at the very top part of the entire property. And the rest of it goes down to 990. So it's relatively flat when you stop and think about the whole thing.
I'm curious to see what that view shed would be before I'm okay with saying we don't have to screen a lot of it, then I'd like to see what the...
I'm not sure if we have any, but I'm looking.
Mr. Chairman, I
Yes.
walked the property, and I can tell you that it's flat on the south side against the street. And if they put their wells, is it 200 feet they agreed to? Forgot. Back from the south side, from the road. Anyway, 200 feet, then the property falls off, and there's a creek, a big lake down to the north side, so it would, the vision gets less as it goes over the hill.
And there's a lot of trees on this side, if I remember right, or, well, some trees.
Fair amount, and they've agreed to put screening around their tank batteries, and they've done that on other leases. I went out and inspected that they're doing, and they did that on their own.
And as I understand this, there's a landowner, and then there's the applicant who would lease that land or that use from the landowner?
Yes, sir.
Is there a representative from the landowner here this evening? I believe we have some questions for them.
So,
Okay, if you could step up to the microphone and state your name and...
Good evening. My name is John Gilchrist. I'm an attorney with the law firm of Hayden Jones, 11,000 King Street, Overland Park, Kansas 66210, and I represent the multiple owners of the property. Happy to answer any questions.
I guess one of my questions that has come up this evening is what is the long-term plans for that property? Has that been discussed or?
Well, as the city knows, the property owners petitioned to have a sewer district developed and install a sewer, and that was completed. Unfortunately, the real estate market tanked during this time period after the start of the construction and now. And so in essence, the original plan was to sell the property to a developer for residential purposes. As you know, property in the area, especially that area over there, for development purposes is not selling. The value's dropped considerably. There's little market going on. And so in the time frame, the landowners are looking for other options for other uses until the real estate market comes back. And so their intent was to allow drilling to take place on this property with a strict understanding that at any point in time the landowner could either terminate, buy out, or cancel the wells on the property. Being that the long-term goal is to probably sell the property to a developer for either residential or commercial on some of the busy or to-be-busy intersections along the way. So that's kind of what was the intent of the homeowners originally, but with the real estate market, they're trying to find ways to keep everything afloat, to help pay for the sewer assessments, to make use of the property other than livestock And as the Commission knows, there are other drilling operations going on in the area. And so the intent was to, during the short time period or 10-year time period, depending upon what it takes for the real estate market to come back, would be to allow drilling operations to commence.
So basically, this is to help you guys help pay back some of that benefit district and keep yourself afloat during these tough times.
Well, that's a part of it.
Okay.
We are looking at all options. They're still trying to market the property. I know that some of the property owners have worked with city staff, former city staff, on trying to develop certain business-type parks over in the area, trying to develop interest from outside developers for that area of Gardner. They're still trying to pursue those options, trying to market and sell the property, and so they're looking at all their options.
Other questions? Thank you, Mr. McGilchrist.
All right, this is,
Mr. Chairman, is it too late to make a comment?
Close the public
We've
hearing.
closed the public hearing. We can all agree to hear a public comment at this time? Is that correct? Okay.
Okay.
If
Yes or no?
Yes. If everybody's in agreement with
I'm
that.
sorry, I can't hear what you're saying. Let's speak deep for your...
Unanimous.
My name is Vern Kanabe. I live at 16200 Waverly. My family owned about 400 acres out there where you all have been talking about. As far as I'm concerned, they've raped us. And I tell you that you better look at your nice fancy road, because there will be mud and trucks and semis and rock haulers going up and down the road spreading mud. So you ought to have some way to make sure that they clean the roads off and they don't tear up your high-dollar road that you just put in. I think that's about all I can tell you. But all of this has happened on about 400 acres of my land that my family owned. And you can see what's happened to it. Farmland and all. Thank you.
So I have a question for you, sir.
Yes, sir.
You've owned land that they've drilled on, and is it this company that's drilled on, or other companies?
My family owned 400 acres on the north side of 159th Street, on Waverly Road, on either side of Waverly Road.
And there's currently drilling that's happened on those?
They put 18 wells on 80 acres. Now, I agree you probably have control of that, but when this first oil well drilled in Johnson County was drilled on this property in 1937, but there were no stipulations as to when they can do, how much money they got. There was nothing like that, because who knew what was going to happen to the oil at that time? So they just drilled, but the lessee, the owner of the lease, can do whatever he wants to. You own what's on top, he owns what's underneath, so he can do anything he wants to. But you do have stipulations made right now. That before that didn't happen back in 37, 54, and 70, when the different leases were established. But I know from experience what they can do. It looks good, and the money's good, but the land isn't worth 2 cents after you get done for farmers.
And do you have current leases?
I have current leases. I have 28 wells on 160 acres.
Thank you.
Yes.
and I believe that is a different operator from the one applying tonight. But to get back to this photograph, this is from the Johnson County Ames website. This was taken from 159th Street, looking down the gravel road that the tank battery would be off of. So the tank battery would be somewhere back in here.
I don't know that I have any concerns. I mean, I think the property owners have a vested interest in, you know, maintaining the integrity of the property. I mean, if they allowed them to go to the maximum density, then the property would essentially be useless. And I mean, I think as a property owner, they're certainly thinking out into the future, you know, because property will, the oil will play out at some time, I'm assuming. So, you know, I think that's a contractual matter between them and the development company. I don't have any concern.
Did I understand that we have a geologist or geoengineer here?
Mr., is it Bender, is that correct?
Jeff Bender.
Ms. Bender, how long do these wells typically last if they are
Depends on
successful?
supply. It can be 20 years, 30 years. A lot of it depends on what kind of production you get out of it. When you get into the later stages of the production, that's when you have to go into secondary and tertiary recovery, use the water flow in order to move the oil toward production zones. So you have to inject water in order to get the oil moving along.
To push it along, but you don't have to at first?
Strings, the oil moves the string.
Hmm.
You're just pushing the strings along to the recovery well, and then it's pumped off with that.
Okay. So 20 to 30 years is your,
Generally, it depends on the
recovery.
reservoir and what you've got going, so. And a lot of it's economics related too.
so the applicant's representative mentioned that they would be able to cancel this at any time. So, but not the applicant, but the owners, the landowner's representative. And so the applicant then could be sitting here 5 years down the road, and the owner could cancel this? Would they have even come close to recovering any of their costs?
It just depends. I haven't seen any of the reservoir information on this.
So we don't know what's really down there?
Jim might have a better idea on that.
What was the question, please?
Do we know if this is productive land for this, or?
No,
Is there any
the 80 acres to the east has been drilled all to the Barboursville sand. I think they have some water flood going on there. Mr. Nobby's, he just spoke of his property, that's to the south and east. That's all water flooded. So in the area, we have success. There's no producing wells on this big tract of land. I know of dry holes that have been drilled on this land. So you don't know until you really drill, take a look at it, put it on the pump jack and see if it's any good, and if it's good. It's kind of a good news, bad news story. You want success for the people and the landowner, but the more success they have, it makes the future cleanup job and planning job and engineering job more difficult, but not impossible.
Now, question.
Go ahead.
If they don't find anything in that particular hole, that's not considered a well, correct?
No, that'll be plugged immediately.
Okay, but can you build on top of that?
No.
Okay, so once they drill that hole, if it produces or not, you can't do anything with that little piece of property that's the land up above. You have to keep it clear.
I don't think there's any regulation says you can't use it, but just being a reasonable person,
Okay.
I don't think you want to
Okay.
build a house or a garden on top of it.
And that's just what I'm wanting to find out, if it does produce, it's considered a well, but if it's not producing, if it was just a dry hole, it still really wouldn't want to put a house on top of it.
Still has to have concrete column
Okay.
in it.
All right.
And those would be identified as well, so people would know.
Mhm.
Okay.
Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
When you place a well, you have to cite it on the map with the Kansas Corporation Commission, and then they are also required to give us a site plan, exactly where it's going.
Okay.
You said as a reasonable person, you wouldn't want to put a garden on top of that?
No, you wouldn't want to do anything on top of it.
Yeah. Is it safe for agricultural afterwards?
They do.
Yeah.
They do work it, yes. That's normally.
Okay, they work it, but is it safe?
Yeah, it's safe. That's why they make it cut off below plow depth, so
Okay.
you can go ahead.
So you go ahead
That's-
and cultivate
okay.
the land.
It's 6 to 8
So it's
down.
6 to 8 feet down below the surface.
Okay, well, as a layperson, my questions are going to get into the environment and protection of the environment. And some specific questions that I have I guess first of all, if you can explain hydraulic fracturing. I mean, it's something that we hear in the news, and I don't know anything about it, so can we...
Yeah, I can take that. It's a technique been in practice for over 60 years. A lot of the news you're seeing these days is related to horizontal wells, where they're going in and fracturing very tight shales, and also in some areas producing gas out of coal. What it's doing, you're actually going ahead and then you're reworking the well, you're setting casing, and you're you shoot holes in the casing, and that causes the fracturing. But in order to do that, you have to have fluids behind it, which a lot of it's sand and water with a few chemicals in it. Traditional fracturing, which this Lease is wanting to use, would be just going in and instead of going a hole down and then going horizontally, you'd just be going down and hitting the strata that's actually in place, it's actually producing the oil, and fracturing that so it makes it more permeable, allows, and more porous, allows the gas, I begin with gas long lately, allows the oil and fluids to come into the borehole and then recover to the surface. So a lot of the issues related to hydraulic fracturing that you see in the newspaper, a lot of the literature you see, like the movie Gasland, you see where they've gone in and they've had problems with oil drilling or gas production, where they've gone in to produce gas out of these horizontal wells. But today's research has found that it's really not the actual fracturing that's caused it. It's usually a problem with the casing, the vertical casing, because you drill down vertically and then you go out horizontal. And usually it's a bad cement job around the casing for the vertical portion of the hole. It's not necessarily the horizontals that are allowing the fluids and the fracturing to impact groundwater, which is the primary issue, particularly in Pennsylvania and out west.
So that could be a concern even with the vertical wells that we have around here.
It's a limited, it's a little more of a limited impact, because the way that it depends on how the rock fractures and how it propagates and where the borehole itself, because it has a limited radius, maybe 300, 400 feet maximum, if you really put the juice to it. So it's a very limited impact, whereas when you go horizontally, you're talking about miles of potential impact, but we're talking about a very small zone of influence. So it's basically just trying to create more permeable material closer to the well to allow you to be able to produce that formation.
So the concerns that I would have, again, as a layperson, with whether or not there's any existing water wells or agricultural wells or anything in the area that might be impacted, or groundwater, aquifer, anything. I mean, I understand that there's a KCC or KDHE, someone's looking at this from...
KCC will look at that. And then also the water, Department of Agriculture, Water Division also keeps track of water, especially when you go in and you're doing the water flow.
Right.
But as far as the aquifer, KDHE has more jurisdiction over the drinking water aquifers. And they're the ones that are going to be watching that part of it. So, but as far as generally where they're going to produce water for drinking water sources, they're much shallower than where they're actually going to be producing oil and gas from. So really the problems you're going to have is if you have a bad casing or a bad cement job, a hole is what it is. And it's not necessarily that the horizons you're actually trying to produce out of that are causing the problem, but it's a backup hole where you might have leakage in the tubing or in the casing.
A lot of that they've proven to be inferior products when they're using that.
And it can be, yeah, it can be bad joints, corroded casings, number of things like that.
Does that answer your question?
Yeah, what I'm trying to figure out is how does one ensure that
Well, you know, when
it's protected from this, you know, bad material or bad installation.
well, what you do, you need to go in, the state requires that you go in and do a bond, what they call cement bond log, and it actually looks at the cement, the downhole geophysical method, you actually look at the, you can actually see how well the casing of the well is meant to the formation. So how good of a seal you actually have. And it also looks at, it'll count the collars and it can also see how it might be impacted if there is a weakness, you know, if there is a bad cement job. Now they can go in, they can shoot holes in that casing and squeeze cement into it, and seal those off. It's just a matter of practice that they need to do that work.
So
There's ways to make sure that it's as safe as possible.
And does the applicant or the landowner have anything to add to that conversation as well, or?
I can talk more about it, about
You're kind of like me, yeah.
cement jobs and,
If you would, please.
Mr. Bender, can I get your address, please?
Oh, it's 9400 Ward Parkway, Kansas City, Missouri, 64114. Uh-huh.
the KCC requires us to set surface casing.
If you'd probably talk into the microphone so we can get you on.
The KCC requires us to set a certain amount of surface casing depending on what county you are. Here it's, in Johnson County, it's 20 feet. And that's what usually protects your groundwater in that area. And then when we cement the well, we MIT it, we perform a mechanical integrity test, and we pressure test the pipe right there. So that's kind of another, you know, fail-safe on the pipe itself. So.
Are there any other questions or comments?
no, I think that pretty well answers
Thank you both.
my questions and concerns, not knowing anything about oil and gas drilling. One question that I had that I think it was Mr. Williams that said that the recommendation was that the wells be fenced. Is that right?
Yes, excuse me. That was one of the suggestions that we made, a stipulation that during the drilling and the application period, the drill pits be fenced, because those are 7 or 8 foot pits full of the junk. And then afterwards, you fence in the actual well. We didn't say to fence in the tank battery, we just asked that those batteries be locked